Well, let's have a look at what's making news in print and online this morning. We're joined by the Executive Director of think tank, the Australia Institute, Ben Oquist. G'day, Ben. How are you going?
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Michael. Going very well. And what about you?
Well, we're preparing ourselves for what is going to be a very big 2 weeks of Parliament and politics, and we got a bit more of a sense of it from the weekend. It's every day now. Things are just really starting to get pretty tight.
Yeah, well, as you say, Parliament returns this week, and traditionally the government hasn't been doing very well when Parliament sits, and they're entering this week with the, I hate to use the word, the Techscape scandal continuing to envelop the government. And it's covered in most of the papers today that the Prime Minister yesterday invoked his faith to give forgiveness to Barnaby Joyce on, of all things, I Forgive Day. So the papers can't resist drawing the connections there. But the story is kind of really rolling on and escalating. Came out, of course, of those leaked texts that came out of the press club where Gladys Berejiklian was seen to load on the Prime Minister, and now Barnaby Joyce's own texts, and now who leaked them. And I mean, there's such a devastating character assessment from one's own side in politics. And now it's actually, according to the papers, leading into kind of leadership rumblings in the National Party. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that it will be 10-10 if somebody challenged. The Australian reports that McCormack isn't ruling out coming back to the leadership at some stage. No one's talking about a leadership challenge right now, but it's all leading to a lot of division and disunity. Liberals, in the Sydney Morning Herald, Liberals speaking out, so they don't want Barnaby Joyce appearing in the media anymore because he's dragging down the Liberal vote. Michelle Grattan, I noted, writing that Labor's election advertising campaign becomes easier by the day. So all that playing into this first sitting week, coming back, covered in the papers today.
As a veteran of federal parliament for many decades, Ben, you know, don't you, that when things start to happen, momentum builds up pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the timing is bad for the government, of course, on the eve of the election. I noted Jim Chalmers saying the government is a smoking ruin of division, disunity and dysfunction. And it allows the opposition to say such things, doesn't it? And it all feels like it's snowballing on the government and comes at exactly the wrong time, because when MPs come back together in Parliament House, they talk about amongst themselves, and they talk to their colleagues, and they talk to journalists, and all these things just continue to build momentum. And everybody knows division is death in politics. And there's this talk of billboards appearing in electorates just quoting Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales in some of those key independent seats. So I think this leads to a very unstable period when Parliament comes back for these 2 sitting weeks starting tomorrow.
The ABC got some good news in regards to funding overnight, waking up to hear about it this morning, but I guess you could read something into the timing of it as well.
Yeah, interestingly, there had been some recent rumblings, particularly from those independents challenging Liberal moderates about the ABC funding issue being particularly potent. So on the eve of the election, ahead of the budget on March 29, the government has announced it's not going to continue with the funding freeze on the ABC. It was more accurately, it's not going to re-put in the funding freeze. The funding freeze was due to end this year, and the government's announced it's not going to put in a new funding freeze. So the fact that the ABC is not being cut anymore is seen as something of a boost for the ABC. But of course, this comes on the back of revelations from Senate estimates questions last week that the ABC has actually had cumulative cuts, if you add it up over the last 8 or 9 years, of $530 million or more, and that equates to some 630 jobs. So really today's announcement is status quo, but in an era when the ABC has faced funding cuts, as revealed in those questions, it's seen as a funding boost to the ABC. And as I said, it does come off the back of some talk from the independents or independent candidates that they were going to campaign on this issue that's seen as pretty politically potent in some of those seats. So, yeah, I think the timing is interesting. They've just been starting to rumble, and the government's got out in front of it and says no more cuts to the ABC for now.
OK, now let's finish with a story that is going to resonate with lots of people out there this morning, and that is grave questions now over the future of neighbours.
Yeah, this story covered in the Guardian and page 3 of the Australian. I note that, didn't realise this, but Neighbours is largely funded out of UK and Channel 5 in particular, who puts most of the funding up to broadcast Neighbours effectively and commission it. Channel 5 in the UK gets 1.2 million viewers a day watching Neighbours, but Channel 5 is going through some kind of rebranding or repositioning, and is said to not be going to commission Neighbours anymore, which would mean Neighbours wouldn't exist unless the production company can find a new overseas buyer. Neighbours has been going around 37 years. I must have confessed to being an early fan of Neighbours before it was cool, I might add.
Back with Scott and Charlene in Ramsay Street. Is that your era, Ben?
It is, I'm afraid. A big fan of Kylie before she was big, but she's not good still. And Jason. But this is apparently part of Channel 5's repositioning. Widely known, apparently, according to The Guardian, for being famous for films, football, and an F word that I won't use on morning TV. And it's going to dump Neighbours. Good news is, though, it's not going to dump Home and Away just yet, which it also commissions.
That's a relief.
And speculation in the bottom part of this story in The Guardian by Amanda Mead and her UK compatriot, that there's talk of bringing back the early Neighbours stars for a big finale. Well, we'll see.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Guy Pearce, Jason Donovan. I'd be all for that. So it's an interesting story given the influence that this staple of television has had on Britain's view of Australia, quite frankly. Hey, Ben, thank you very much for bringing it all to us this morning.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Michael.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.